Good evening, everyone. I'm Trident's Marketing Communications Manager, Daniel Sloan, and we're excited to be bringing you today's Culture of Research and Education webinar called Gratitude, a Lever for Organizational Performance. Today's presenter will be Trident DBA alum, Dr. Sarah Ratekin. The core webinar series is designed to provide faculty, students, and alumni an opportunity to share their research and scholarship with the Trident community. By fostering a culture of professional development and idea exchange, participants will have access to a valuable forum for lifelong learning. This university-wide effort is led by Trident's Doctoral Studies Directors.
A few notes before we begin. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. There are two ways you can ask a question. First, you can type the question in the chat box, and you can do this at any time during the webinar. Also, you're welcome and encouraged to verbally ask a question yourself after the presentation. If you would like to do this, just simply raise your hand and you will be called on. At that point, you can unmute your phone and ask your question. Feel free to leave your camera on or turn it off, it's up to you, but just remember, if your camera is on, everyone in the audience can see you. This webinar is being recorded. All attendees will receive a link to the recording next week. Our host today will be Dr. Indira Guzman. She's the Doctoral Studies Director in the Glenn R. Jones College of Business and a Professor of IT Management. She's been a faculty member and dissertation mentor at Trident since 2006. Her research has been published in over 50 academic outlets. Welcome, Dr. Guzman. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining today's presentation. Thank you for being here this afternoon. Today, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Sarah Ratekin. Dr. Ratekin is a 2021 graduate at Trident's Doctor of Business Administration program and currently serves as a Student Engagement Director in Higher Education. She has been featured on podcasts speaking on the power of happiness in the workplace and in life, presented at multiple conferences and facilitated numerous workshops on workplace excellence. She's an enthusiastic positivity activist, author, and researcher, and she translates the science of happiness and gratitude into actionable plans that provide clients with radically positive results. In addition, Dr. Ratekin is a military veteran, and we thank her for her service. Today, she will be sharing her experience as a doctoral student in our DBA program in the College of Business here at Trident, and she will share her doctoral research and her expertise on the topic of gratitude. So with that, I ask you to give your full attention to Dr. Ratekin and help me in welcoming her to the stage. Dr. Ratekin.
Dr. Guzman, thank you so much for that introduction. And I am very excited to, over the next half hour, summarize a little bit of my journey through this conversation around understanding how gratitude can be an organizational performance lever. And I just want to take a moment to thank both my committee chair, Dr. Luton, and the committee members who made this possible, Drs. Linsky and Young. It simply would not have been possible without everybody's assistance. So let's start with understanding the research partner that was included in this conversation. So the applied sciences conversation requires answering a question that applies to an actual workplace challenge. And for this, I had the great privilege of working with the Spur Group, which is an IT consulting company based on the West Coast. And the reason that this partnership was so strong is that this organization already had an interest in how they could leverage gratitude within their organization. Okay. And because they'd done a little bit of work in this space already, their employees were already somewhat familiar with the concept of gratitude as it pertained to the workplace. So when we're thinking about gratitude as an organizational practice, it helps to come from a place of a strong conceptual background. The truth is, it is an unfortunate reality that employee engagement challenges exist across industry, and organizations, regardless of size or industry or geographic location, continue to struggle with this issue. This is a multi-trillion-dollar conversation. And to take a look at how we could reshape this conversation, part of the framework here was built on previous research. And in no small degree, that depended on Kahneman and Kruger's work measuring subjective well-being and Brief and Motowidlow's pro-social organizational behavior therapy. We have some understanding of this practice of gratitude, but not particularly in the workplace. And that's my hope for tonight, to share that journey with you. So obviously, when framing a doctoral study project in this program, it helps to frame the conversation, something that is somewhat manageable. So the two research questions that we settled on for this project were, first, how does intentional gratitude influence employee job satisfaction? And can those intentional gratitude practices be improved upon to increase job satisfaction for employees? Now, as I mentioned just a moment ago, there is quite a bit of research around gratitude and its impact on life satisfaction. And I'm grateful for that foundation because it gave us an impetus to research the nuance of applying this in a workplace setting. But the truth is, the exploration of intentional gratitude in the workplace is very much in an exploratory stage. There is a documented link between employee engagement and performance, and the data on that continues to grow. But what about gratitude? What part does that play in the conversation? So with this study, my goal was to really explore the impact of gratitude on job satisfaction, employee confidence, and the overall impact to the employee experience. And I think unless you've been living under a rock, this topic is certainly pertinent in the time of the Great Resignation and other challenges facing organizations today. This also shapes an opportunity for future research to look at the impact of gratitude on additional engagement factors and really quantify that impact on specific organizational performance metrics. So I just want to ground us on a couple of terms first, because it's helpful to come from a place of standard understanding when having these conversations. When we talk about employee engagement, that's really the employee's perception of their organization and their place within it. And for gratitude in this space, we're looking at a place where the individual on a regular basis recognizes that in some way, shape, or form, they have benefited as a result of the actions of an external agent or party. And for job satisfaction, that really is that positive emotional state of feeling that when people have completed a task or understand the value that they offer in their jobs. So I want to return to the partner organization for a minute and set the stage. The Spur Group is a privately held startup organization that's based in Redmond, Washington. Their CEO is Randy Carr. At the time of this research, their annual revenue was right around $49 million. They sit in the management consulting space. At the time of this study, they had 228 employees and continued to grow. And they predominantly operated in North America. And the truth is, as a consulting company, and certainly a consulting company operating during a global pandemic, their employees were already somewhat individually isolated. They tended to work independently with their client base. But even so, the organization had a fairly strong position when it came to employee engagement. They had a strong rating on external benchmarks, both Glassdoor and Indeed, which are anonymous reporting environments. And they consistently landed in the Seattle Business Magazine's top 100 list for organizations. They were also well positioned. Their revenue had been growing year on year, and their employee growth was keeping pace. And to track their progress, because they recognized the value of employee engagement, they conducted annual employee engagement surveys, as well as ad hoc focus surveys around particular questions and challenges that were brought to the leadership by various employee resource groups or even individual employees. So this partner already had a strong sense of where they were, and they knew it could be better. So no research exists in a vacuum. So when beginning this conversation with myself and then with my chair and my committee, it was helpful and really crucial to understand the foundations of existing literature. And I will skim through this fairly quickly, but I think it's helpful to understand that there are existing historic theories around employee satisfaction and well-being. And certainly the employee engagement landscape has been a very well-researched topic. It's something that many organizations keep a strong pulse on. And we know that the impact of disengagement is massive. The US gross domestic product is impacted to the tune of about $500 billion a year. Companies are spending billions of dollars every year on employee engagement initiatives. And despite that investment, engagement numbers remain stubbornly low. And this isn't just an American problem. Globally, the most recent Gallup research shows that engagement sits at about 22%. So for business owners who are writing a paycheck to their employees, that's a lot of money that is not resulting in a return on their investment. So we have to understand those impacts on organizational performance if we're going to make it better. And gratitude as a concept has been around since the dawn of humankind, really. And certainly other researchers have done a really excellent job of diving into what gratitude is and the impact it has on our psychological and physiological well-being. There is some research to suggest that gratitude can be a buffer for a host of challenges that humans face in their daily lives. And there is some work looking at gratitude in the workplace. Traditionally, this looks at the impact of gratitude on burnout and job satisfaction in academia and in healthcare, for example. Some researchers have looked at ways to measure gratitude, right? There's no cheek swab for gratitude, but we can understand in a quantifiable way how this impacts people. There's been very little, but not none, very little research on intentional gratitude and what it does to the employee experience. The two studies that I founded my research design on were based in Italy and Nepal. And in both of these experiences, researchers looked at the impact of employees intentionally practicing gratitude in the workplace and the results that it had. And it was promising, and it gave me hope that there was an opportunity to dig a little deeper and learn what we could do about this situation. So looking at this theoretical foundation, Kahneman and Kruger have done a tremendous amount of work, and some of the things that they found fly contrary to the common narrative around what creates job satisfaction. We know from the research that results of our work and understanding those results and developing healthy relationships in the workplace tend to have a stronger positive impact on subjective well-being of our employees than salary and fringe benefits and job title. That's not the narrative, but the data shows us that that is the case. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the effort that people are doing as a trend is not impacting the experience for employees in measurable, meaningful ways. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to understand that the truth is pro-social organizational behavior is incredibly important. People tend to want to assist the people around them. This is really well established in the literature, and we understand that when we can harness this power productively, it can actually change the way people frame their behavior. So can we see gratitude as a form of pro-social behavior and realize beneficial outcomes based on the references in the literature? Well, to do that, we had to have a design that made sense. So the first goal was to really understand the design of this study. And that's a challenge that I think most people in these programs face. How do we scope the work in a way that is meaningful and manageable? So for this program, I decided, with great help from my chair and my committee, to shape this around a case study design, qualitative case study. We took volunteers from the organization and had them work through some experiences. And the goal here was to understand the impact of those experiences, of experiencing and practicing intentional gratitude, and what that would do to their experience. To understand the outcomes, it was, of course, really helpful and necessary to engage in qualitative analysis, specifically thematic analysis, to analyze the impact that employees were realizing in some way from their experiences. So at a high level, we started with an intake survey with open-ended questions to gauge employee sentiment around positive and negative experiences that they'd had, their current situation in their current roles. And then we divided them into 2 separate groups, and we'll dive into this a little bit later. After they engaged in gratitude practices, we then brought them back and did semi-structured interviews to understand what their outcomes were. And I'm excited to share that with you in just a few moments. So who are we looking at here? Who are the participants in this research? Well, we opened the opportunity up to every full-time employee of the organization. And what we saw at a high level was that across the organization, there was interest in understanding and being part of this conversation. So we did have representation from senior executive leadership. We had we had individual consultant, individual contributors as the bulk of our participant group. And we even had support staff, administrative support, et cetera. To make this possible, we opened it up to a convenience sampling approach, where all levels of the organization were invited to participate, but we capped participation at 30, partially to make it manageable, but also to allow for attrition, which is a known concern in studies of this space. And again, we had the 3 data sources to look at: the intake survey results, and then the interview with both groups of participants, and taking those results and comparing them between the 2 groups as well as against their beginning state. So let's see where that got us. So for the first data source, we started with an intake survey. All participants went through this process. It was about a 45-minute survey, really kind of in-depth, qualitative, open-ended questions to capture the understanding of how employees saw job satisfaction, how they approached confidence in their roles, and what their sentiment was around gratitude in the workplace. Because let's be honest, this is not a topic that is necessarily front of mind in much of corporate America. So we wanted to understand where they came from. This data was collected through SurveyMonkey and then stored on a password-protected hard drive. It'll be stored for 5 years to ensure that we have data integrity. And the desired outcome here was to really benchmark this group on where they sit with job satisfaction and role confidence and their general sentiment around gratitude in the workplace. So after the participants of the intake survey, then they were separated into 2 groups. And the first group, the intrinsic gratitude group, was asked to keep a journal for 1 month in which they captured something once a day, one experience that they had that was positively impactful to them and that was related to an experience they had in their professional experience. So whether that was partnership with a colleague or a positive interaction with a vendor, or even a great interaction with the barista as they were getting their morning coffee, to just capture one moment of gratitude and reflect on that once a day for a month. The second group, the extrinsic gratitude group, was asked to take it a step further, to recognize those moments and then express gratitude to the person who created that space for them. So if it was a colleague, say to the colleague, thank you for that experience, to thank the barista for the coffee, to express appreciation to the client or to the vendor. And they captured those in a log for 1 month. And again, these were after that month, we had the interviews with these participants. These video interviews were recorded and then transcribed to allow for some of that thematic analysis to happen. And again, this data is also being stored on a password protected hard drive and will be kept there for 5 years. It's actually in my safe deposit box now. So our goal here was both to understand the impact of the individual experience and to see if we could tease out any differences between the intrinsic journaling group and the extrinsic outreach group. So thematic analysis is certainly an interesting and complex process, but at a high level, it involved transcribing the data, making sure the data was clean, and then using tools to start to identify the ideas and the concepts and the themes that started to emerge from these interviews, to apply codes to those to make sense of all of this input that we had, and then to identify those themes, contextualize them, and articulate them in a way that was meaningful to understanding the experience, as well as providing opportunities for next steps for both the partner organization and potentially future research. Obviously, there are always considerations when doing research of this type. We had to have a letter of intent and authority from our research partner to conduct this research in the first place. We definitely collected informed consent, and we kept that informed consent regularly part of the conversation throughout this experience with our participants. Confidentiality is so crucial in this space to ensure quality data and also protect the rights of our participants. And that continues on into protecting the data that we collected around their experiences. The IRB process, the Institutional Review Board for this, is incredibly powerful and helps drive home just how meaningful and important this process of confidentiality and consent and protecting participants really is. And ensuring that we have a strong way to protect that data afterwards. And when we've seen the news stories about data breaches, I think we understand at a high level what that means, but to have that really solid in our minds as we're shaping these experiences is also incredibly helpful, because it definitely impacts the way that we approach our research. So we made sure that we had recurring reminders of privacy commitments and the participant rights at every step of the process. So what did we find? So we ended up with 17 participants who ended up taking that benchmark survey. And that was really great considering we were doing this during a pandemic with lots of other demands and conflicts on people's time. That gave us 2 groups of participants. And we ended up interviewing 2 participants from the journaling group and 3 participants from the active engagement group. And again, these interviews were recorded by Zoom. They were then transcribed using a data transcription service and cleaned manually to ensure there were no errors in transcription. And then really spent some quality time analyzing that data and really just sitting with it. I would say one of my learnings, and I'll talk about this more later, but one of my learnings was you cannot rush thematic analysis. You have to give it time for those shapes to emerge from the conversation. The themes will reveal themselves, but you have to spend some time with it. We also made sure that we had a demographic analysis just to understand were there nuances between different groups of employees. It was important to us, for example, to mimic in our participant group the general breakup of the organization. So we captured information such as, was a participant a supervisor or an individual contributor? How long had they been in the company? How long had they spent in their job? Because we believed that these were going to be important indicators and could provide some more context around job satisfaction and confidence. And we did end up finding some of those nuances, and it would be interesting to explore those further. So what did we find? So first of all, we wanted to understand, what does job satisfaction look like for this particular group of people? Because it's not really reasonable for me to tell them what job satisfaction is. And so what we saw across this organization was that adequate compensation, despite Kahneman and Kruger's definition of satisfaction, compensation was certainly at the top of mind for individuals. But autonomy in completing work and having the flexible schedule and the creative freedom to engage in work in a way that made sense to the individual was also a very strong component of job satisfaction. Also, having meaningful work, which does tie back to Kahneman and Kruger's previous research. Being appreciated and recognized for their work. Having peer support and supervisory support. And interestingly, having a positive culture and workplace relationships. And I found this to be particularly interesting because while compensation appears to be at the top of the list when considering the actual words that people said, the themes that actually emerged were that there were other pieces of their employee experience that were actually collectively as important, if not more important, to creating that holistic sense of job satisfaction. And that does confirm what Kahneman and Kruger found in their work around this topic. We also asked these individuals to consider both positive experiences and not so positive experiences when sharing their feedback. And so when we're looking at the impact in a high job satisfaction experience, what did that look like? People reported having a sense of understanding what the results of their work were. Was there meaning in the work? Did they feel appreciated and recognized for the work that they're doing and the extra effort that they're putting in? And how were the relationships in their professional experience? Did they feel supported by their colleagues? Did they feel supported by their leadership? Did they have a strong client relationship? And this points to the fact that those relationships don't necessarily have to exist at the team or organizational level. They simply have to be present in the professional experience. And then on the contrary side of this, what creates those low job satisfaction experiences? Well, it should come as no surprise that conflicting expectations are certainly a challenge for people. And having unclear or no feedback also was something that resonated strongly with our participants. And unfortunately, bullying and negative behavior do exist in the workplace. And it's not really surprising that this is a contributing factor to a low job satisfaction experience, but it was particularly indicated by several of our participants as well. When it comes to confidence, which is different than job satisfaction, we saw some similar themes emerging. When people felt highly confident in their role, it was due to, in some part, having clear direction and clear expectations on the front end. And when they completed a task, getting clear feedback and having their questions answered from either their clients or their supervisors. People also reported higher confidence when they felt that they had the support of their management, and that included the autonomy to execute the work that they were tasked with completing. And they also wanted to feel that they had clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities. On the flip side, when people felt less confidence or low confidence in their job spaces, conflicting expectations comes right to the top again, conflicting priorities, having to take on extra risk with less understanding of why, having unclear directions or unclear roles and responsibilities. Again, that lack of feedback or lack of guidance also bubbled to the top in these conversations. And having bullying or negative behavior. It's an unfortunate reality for people in some workspaces, even white-collar ones. What I found to be fairly interesting in this space was when we asked people about gratitude in the workplace, reactions were fairly mixed. But when people experienced gratitude in both high and low confidence and high and low job satisfaction scenarios, the same factors were present. They felt that that gratitude was because of or in relationship to the people around them, right? They experienced gratitude from their team members. They've experienced gratitude expressed to them from their managers. And I think this word cloud does a good job of articulating the positional power of those statements of gratitude. The significantly higher impact when those statements of or expressions of gratitude came from people in supervisory roles. That doesn't mean that people did not find power in those expressions when they came from peers or direct reports or other parties, but that supervisory managerial impact cannot be understated. So when we think about the participants in this study, it is interesting to note that the gender ratio of this study actually skewed a little higher compared to the general makeup of the organization, but not significantly. We did track the same number relatively of supervisors and individual participants as is in the general population of the organization. And we didn't really have a way to track the other comparative data, such as amount of time in college or, college degree, or time in role or time with the company, compared to the sample versus the company makeup. That data just wasn't available to us. But we can see here that we did get a good assortment. So this study doesn't just spotlight a particular experience within the organization. I feel that it's fairly representative of the participants in the organization, generally speaking. So we also wanted to ensure that we weren't skewing the results by people who were particularly excited about this topic or had a lot to say or maybe had some grievances to air. So we did track participation time, both when it came to the intake survey and the time spent in the interviews afterwards. Now, it's perhaps not surprising that the survey took a half hour to take. There were about 45 questions on the survey, and I'm grateful that people took the time to fill that out. But we do see that we actually got really robust responses to the questions that we asked. We weren't getting just single word responses. And when it came to the interviews, while there was some difference between the journaling group and the outreach group, we still had really adequate, robust conversations with these participants in both groups. We tracked this both by time in the interview itself, as well as the average word count per respondent. So these numbers are fairly comparable, and I think help benchmark the experience across the two groups. So this is not a quantitative study per se. The power in this conversation comes from hearing from the participants and understanding specifically what they got out of either the journaling experience or the expressions of gratitude. And this was really eye-opening for me. So we heard from our participants things like, I work independently. And so being able to pause and reflect gave me a chance to reconnect. We saw people saying that they were busy throughout the day. And so this gave them a chance to reflect and connect back to the fact that the work that they're doing is meaningful, not just to them, but to others around them. We saw that people recognized there was a ripple effect in their conversations around gratitude. And so what this ended up showing us was that there was a connection here. There was a connection happening, whether people were participating in the journaling practice or they were participating in the extrinsic outreach expressions of gratitude. And we saw a subtle shift happening where people started to consider gratitude as a piece of their core way of operating, because it helped them feel connected in an environment where they have historically been literally and metaphorically somewhat disconnected, even before the pandemic situation came around. So that theme of connection and the impact to team culture was very interesting and something to explore further. We also saw that there was certainly an impact on job satisfaction. We see statements from participants such as, literally, the client could not think of a single thing to improve on. That brought that participant a moment of true happiness in their job. And it validated their decision to join the organization because they had worked in other places where gratitude wasn't part of the conversation or the fabric of their experience. We saw managers saying that they validated their belief that gratitude was important as a leadership strategy. And we felt that, again, this impact on job satisfaction was brought about in part because participants started seeing this cohesion happening. And the stronger the team culture was, the more excited they were about the work that they were doing. They felt supported and understood the value of the work that they were doing, all of which were factors of their job satisfaction. It also helped some of our participants understand and come from a place of assumption of goodwill, and opened up conversations around the impact that they were having on others and others were having on them. And as you see here on this example at the bottom of this screen, sometimes we all have those days where it's just one of those days. But hearing, you're doing a great job, help them reframe and salvage what might otherwise have been chalked up as another horrible day at the office. And it helped improve that sense of, yes, I like the work that I'm doing. How about confidence? Again, here we see that there was a positive impact to the sense of confidence, ability to get the job done. Literally, this was called out by the participants. I feel like I'm walking into a project with confidence I didn't have prior because I made it through the previous one and I'm excited to get through to the next. Or how am I going to walk into the day and approach my role today? It helped the gratitude practice anchored them in the positive pieces of that and allowed them to approach that new day with a sense of resilience. They felt, again, connected to others, which created that foundation of trust and safety, which positively impacted their sense of confidence on the job. And importantly, these individuals also shared that when they were practicing gratitude, whether independently or in connection with other people, they felt like they were coming to the office with a more whole sense of who they were and how they wanted to put themselves out there that day. Something that wasn't actually part of the research design, it certainly wasn't one of our research questions, but it came right to the forefront in these conversations, was the impact of this practice on workplace stress and the overall sense of well-being. And this is certainly a topic that is worth exploring further. But I really want to highlight this part of the conversation because we all know that workplace stress is a hot topic, and for good reason. It certainly impacts many aspects of employee experience well beyond the scope of this study. But what people brought up time and time again, unprompted in the interview conversations, was that having these moments, these touch points with gratitude, and we're talking 5 or 10 minutes a day, gave them a space to feel less overwhelmed. It made them feel connected. It gave them permission to pause just for a few moments and connect with the things that were good in their world. And as a result, they were recharged. They were excited to get back into the work that they were doing. They felt more peaceful, which is certainly I would like to have more of in my life. And they recognized that when they were feeling stressed out, that the practice of expressing gratitude or experiencing gratitude privately was a stress relieving experience unto itself. And getting those experiences of connection throughout the day and throughout their week shifted something in their perception of the trend of their experience. And that had a positive impact. So let's look back at those research questions and understand what we're really seeing here from a thematic perspective. Question number 1 is, how do these intentional gratitude practices influence job satisfaction? And what we see is that there's a positive impact on both the sense of connection and company culture or team culture. There certainly was an impact, a positive impact to job satisfaction. People felt regularly reminded of the things that were going well at work. We don't need help remembering what's going poorly. We'll tell ourselves and everybody else around us will too. But this gave some balance to these participants. It strengthened relationships with their coworkers, their teams, their clients, and so on. It had a positive impact to their confidence levels, which led to them taking more responsibility and embracing the work that they were doing with a greater sense of gusto and enthusiasm. And again, that impact, that positive impact on workplace stress and well-being was something that I'm really excited about and looking forward to digging in deeper in future opportunities. So we see that there was reflected in this work a positive impact in all of these aspects of the gratitude practices and job satisfaction. But what about confidence? Well, it's really the same impacts. Again, those connections and team culture reflected not just on confidence, but on job satisfaction itself. The impact on the role confidence was such that the supervisor appreciated the work that they were doing, and that improved their confidence. The client appreciated their work, and that improved their confidence. And that confidence and positivity built on itself like positive bricks in their journey through this experience. Having the company sponsor this activity also created a space that shifted the paradigm for employees in a way that allowed them to give a little bit of time to themselves as a valued asset to the organization. And that changes the narrative for these individuals. And they brought that up several times in our conversations. And several of them pointed out that that improved mood at the work in the workplace or their workday certainly extended beyond the traditional clocked in hours. The concept of work-life separation is pretty fuzzy in today's world. And so recognizing that these impacts can carry on beyond the workplace is also really valuable for people who tend to not really think about those correlations as they move about. So what are the implications for this work? We see that in this experience, there would seem to be some positive impact. Intentional gratitude practices seem to have an opportunity for increased job satisfaction, increased employee confidence, and even possibly employee well-being. And from a body of knowledge perspective, we also see that these intentional gratitude practices were a form of increased pro-social organizational behavior, both the quality of those interactions and the quantity of them. And we also see that there seems to be some support, quite a bit of support for Kahneman and Kruger's model of satisfaction, and that the level of satisfaction that employees felt was directly impacted by their participation in an active gratitude practice of some sort. So what does this mean for this organization? Well, for this company, there are several opportunities to take this work and run with it. One thing that was recommended by me to their leadership was to frame gratitude as a formal company value. They've already framed it as an informal value. They've invested time and energy and effort into this space. Codify that into your way of working, and then encourage gratitude as a daily practice. Now, I want to put a caveat here. Inauthentic gratitude is toxic. And I suspect that many of you on this call or listening to this recording are thinking about times that you've heard from a supervisor, thank you for that thing that you did, and you knew it wasn't authentic, and it didn't lead to a positive outcome. So the authentic practice of gratitude needs to be framed here. But encourage it as a practice, make it a part of your meetings, build it into your culture. Also, how can you make those internal gratitude practices visible? If you're in a physical space, can you put a gratitude wall in your cafeteria? If you're in a virtual space like this organization, can you create a SharePoint site or a Teams channel where people can practice this on a regular basis and get that warm fuzzy that comes from those experiences? Can you make it visible externally? Do you share on your company blog or your press releases gratitude-based statements, whether it's about your employees or your client relationships? This frames gratitude as a piece of your culture and can have an impact when attracting talent. And because this is a consulting company, can they also encourage their clients to engage in intentional gratitude? I think the answer is yes. You bake it into your processes and you offer people the space to lean into this practice because it matters. It makes a difference in that relationship between client and provider. Future research is something that I'm very interested in, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about this process is both building on previous research and then having an opportunity to influence or even engage in future research ourselves. So I would love to see a quantitative study that crosses other industries to see if these effects are generalizable beyond the consulting industry or beyond the tech sector. I would also recommend that if somebody does take this research ball and run with it, that they embed a research champion at their study site to get even more data collection. We all know that more data leads to stronger results. And while these results are interesting, there could be room for even more oomph and more power to these conversations. And I would like to see a version of this research where there's a group who expresses gratitude through actions rather than language, and understand the nuances in that space as well. So at the risk of seeming silly in a conversation around gratitude at the workplace, I want to say thank you to those of you who shared space with me tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this topic. It's something I'm very passionate about. At this point, I will pause and hand the mic over for questions. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Ratekin. This was it's an excellent topic. You know, in my role, I was part of the proposal defense and the final defense, and I have seen this evolution and the topic, and I'm just very happy that you were able to connect the passion that you have with your doctoral research. You know, that is just a great connection, and that's something that we encourage and we want to happen, right? Whatever you like and you have passion for, and then connect it with your research topic, and then conduct that research and that literature review that brings it all together. And I'm also excited to see all the potential for future research, you know, how you can continue doing your research in the topic, because there's a lot of potential. There's a lot that can be done. So again, I just want to commend you and you for your hard work, for getting here. And I want to thank you again for taking this opportunity, you know, to present, to share with other doctoral students your experience and how you did this research. And I also like it, the details, you know, how you presented each of the chapters in the sequence and how you completed the study. So thank you very much for that. It is definitely a very important topic to continue. So thanks. I think we are ready for the questions or comments from the audience.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Guzman, and great job on the presentation, Dr. Ratekin. We have a few questions in already, and as a reminder, if you have any questions, just type them in the chat box. I'll read them out, or if you want to verbalize them, just send me a note in the chat box, raise your hand. Either or works, and I'll turn on your audio and you can ask away. But first question for you, Dr. Ratekin, could you expand on what you meant by not rushing the thematic analysis?
So when I was having this stage of conversation with my chair and with other students in the program, there was this sort of sense from some individuals that thematic analysis was just sort of this thing that you ran through like an algorithm. You could open up a software program and plug your stuff in there, and it would magically provide this insight into the experience. And that is simply not the process of thematic analysis. So while I can appreciate that sometimes it can feel, especially at this stage, you know, you've been through all these classes and all of this hard work, and my golly, you just want to get this thing done. But the truth is, those themes will come organically as you sit with and marinate with your data. So let that happen. Let that happen organically. If you need to put it away and come back to it for a day or two or a week or two even, that's a good idea. We can get a little bit brain blind to the data. We stare at it all the time. We've read it a million times. So put it away, come back to it. Let the data tell you what's in there. Don't try to force it through some artificial process, because it's not going to give you the best results. And the truth is, there's magic in that process, and it's going to provide a better, stronger outcome if you let it happen the way it needs to. So with that, don't put it off to the last minute either, because it will take you probably a little longer than you think it will.
Great, thank you for the insight. And just a reminder too, based on the types of questions that come in, you're welcome to ask specifically about the research, or you feel free to ask about the process as well, because I see a number of current DBA students in the audience. So don't be shy about kind of asking how Dr. Ratekin or how Dr. Guzman may advise you on getting over certain speed bumps in your research. Question for you, Dr. Ratekin, is what are your top tips in managing for the very first time, and how to start implementing gratitude more often in work life?
For me, it's having an overt conversation around what you mean by gratitude. A very easy way to do this, honestly, is to institute a practice where people just openly, as a supervisor, you have to set the stage as a supervisor, I think, where you express gratitude organically when it happens. Don't make a big deal about it right out of the gate. I've seen this done where companies try to institute a Wednesday thank you practice or something, and it feels artificial and forced. So like much change management, if you're trying to institute a new practice, do it in small baby steps. And I think when supervisors and leaders do this, it opens the door for people to feel comfortable practicing this for themselves. But again, I do want to stress that it has to be authentic, and it helps to be somewhat specific. Don't just say, thanks for a good job. Say, hey, Danny, thanks so much for sending me those slides. That made my job a lot easier. Be specific about it.
Definitely great advice. And Eugene, you have your hand up, and you're next. Just give me a second to unmute you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Dr. Ratekin, you mentioned that there wasn't prior specific study on what you were studying. So I'm running through the same thing. How did you overcome when it came to the literature review? I'm piecing things together that has a little bit of attributes of it, but there is not a specific write-up at this point that's going on with our work with the Corps of Engineers, and we are taking not really a business process, but understanding how we communicate. And so it's not really communication, it's not really project management, because we're dealing with all the stakeholders. So how did you overcome that to maybe give me some insight on getting over that hurdle?
That's a really great question, Eugene. And for me, what helped was recognizing that that's part of the joy of doing a doctoral research project, is that you're kind of in uncharted territory, right? So that's a good thing, that you're adding value to the space that you're researching. So can you find other literature or other research projects or studies that are adjacent to the work that you're doing? I mean, we're not here to validate somebody else's work. We really are here to explore a somewhat novel space. So having a sense of how other people approached similar conversations can certainly give us a starting point. And maybe it's in a different industry or a different type of conversation around the topic. But there's very little that's brand spanking new under the sun. So I think recognizing that other people have done something similar gave me hope. And it is hard. You have to, I think, getting really good at doing your searches in the literature databases and finding some of those research projects is going to be really helpful. You know, sometimes you have to change up your search parameters and not stick with your same 10 keywords. Get creative. And I would really recommend, if you're struggling with that, talk to your chair. I know my chair was immensely helpful in this space, because I had those days where I was like, nobody else is doing this and I don't know what to do. And they were able to talk me off the ledge and then help me understand different ways to approach the conversation, because I really think part of this journey is engaging those critical thinking skills and shaping something new. So I think embrace the journey a little bit, and then reach out for help if you're just really stuck.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that for Eugene, and thank you very much, Dr. Ratekin, for describing that so well. But in addition, well, in our DBA program specifically, we have some specifications for the in the template. So that is important, because we could, search forever and just keep going and keep going. So you want to know when to stop. So for that, we want to, we have a very structured template with a clear scope. So you have, like, say, 30 pages of literature review. So you want to go search, but you know that there's an end of this project, and that you just have to complete those requirements. Now, for example, you want to use 50% of the literature from the last 5 years. So there are little specifications like that that are helpful. And I would also encourage you to watch one of our core webinars that it's specifically about conducting the literature review for doctoral research. So that's another tool that can help in that process. And of course, as Dr. Ratekin mentioned, ask questions to the faculty, your chair, or schedule appointments with Dr. Linsky, the professor of doctoral studies in the DBA program, or myself. So you definitely want to ask for help when you get lost, but use those tools as well.
Thank you both for that. Next question I have for you, Dr. Ratekin. I got two questions from the same person, but they're very different questions. So I'll just start you out with the first one. And that's, how did you identify the gaps in the research for your project?
Well, as I was searching for existing literature on this, it became very apparent. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew the area I was interested in researching. So I went looking for what I thought would be supporting literature to guide me to my next step. Like, what's the next obvious iteration of this experience? But what I found was there really wasn't very much. I mean, I am super grateful to the folks in Nepal and Italy for doing something. But it became very apparent in the literature search. Having a strong lit search strategy, though, was crucial for that. Because to Dr. Guzman's point, you could spend the rest of your life digging down the rabbit hole of the databases. So having a really strong search strategy made all the difference, and it helped me frame what existed, and then the gaps kind of made themselves apparent, honestly.
Great, thank you. And then the next question is, how did you justify the small population for data collection?
By recognizing that this is not meant to be the end all be all of the conversation. So we knew that we had to make this manageable. I will say in gratitude to Dr. Guzman, when I was going through the very initial stages of this project, I had grand plans for the data sample set. And both Dr. Guzman and Dr. Linsky made it very clear that that was a project that was much larger in scope than something we were looking for at this stage of the process. It helped me understand that once I finished this study, I can certainly go on and do other work. And that helped me come off the ledge of setting myself up for failure, or at least for way more work than was necessary to get to the end point for this conversation. So did I love it? No. But did I come to accept it? Yes. And I do believe it made for a stronger experience and saved some of that passion for round 2.
Okay, yeah, very good. So I just want to emphasize also the minimum program requirements, right? So we have a minimum that it's really the minimum. Students, of course, can plan for more, but for example, in the DBA program, we say a minimum of 15 as a minimum of responses, but at least 3 data sources. So we have, again, those minimum requirements that give you those limits and help in the scope. But I remember, Dr. Ratekin, she started with a huge project, but again, remember the purpose of a doctoral program and a doctoral, especially the DBA, we are doing applied research. We are not creating theory, we are applying theory to real business problems. So in a doctoral program, we want to acquire the skills that you need to conduct research and demonstrate that you are able to conduct research. And then later on, when you graduate, you can continue doing more research. So that's also important to consider.
Thank you. And next question for you, Dr. Ratekin. To determine your codes and themes, was the direction apparent? How did you determine which questions to use in your survey?
So much of that design was done in collaboration with both my chair, but also with looking at previous types of research of this type. Like, I don't want to have to go out and validate survey questions, right? I need to understand what are the questions that are being used to allow me to get to the information that I need. So I wasn't trying, as Dr. Guzman mentioned previously, I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel or create a new space for this whole concept altogether. So understanding what types of questions are being asked in similar research, that helped me frame that. And what will provide the insight that I'm looking for. So having really crisp research questions on the front end of that process allowed me to craft survey questions and interview questions that allowed me to understand the experiences that answered those research questions. I think without those strong, crisp research questions, you'd be in really big trouble.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And it looks like that's all the questions we have for this evening. If any more questions come in the last couple of minutes, we do log everything, and we'll circle back and answer that for you if there's anything left over. So I do want to thank everyone for their participation tonight. And on the screen now, you can see the core webpage, which is the link I shared in the chat a few minutes ago. You can access more doctoral information and, of course, the aforementioned archived core webinars. We've been doing them for about 7 to 8 years at this point. So there's quite a library there. And thank you again, Dr. Guzman, for hosting tonight's presentation. And Dr. Ratekin, great work on the research. Congratulations again on completing your DBA.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. And thank you so much again, Dr. Ratekin. And thank you everyone for joining. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you.